Well, first of all, I would like to thank you very much for inviting me to this conference, and second of all, apologize for not speaking Greek at all, so I won't be able to switch my presentation to Greek like the former presenter. The other thing, perhaps, I should explain what we understand by financial data. It is something which is slightly different than all that has been said as of today. We are working in fields that are much more related to capital markets, to private banking / corporate investment banking. So in a nutshell, who are we? We are a small company, but we were founded in 1999, and we have specialized in the fields around capital markets. We have developed 6 proprietary platforms for different usage. We have been working with 7 different international partners, and we have customers in 4 countries. By year-end, normally 40% of the biggest banks in Europe should use at least one of our applications. I will try to focus on 4 trends within the financial data in that respect. There are aspects related to market data, and all those aspects might sound a little bit specific, but there are many changes going on in these arenas that I mentioned that are totally parallel to what's going on into the retail banking. There is also aspects related to data of private assets, what we call private capital financial data. There is also issues related to governance of data and compliance, which is something which is probably more common to everybody. In terms of financial market data management, in fact, there are many issues that are coming because there is a ripple effect coming from the main capital markets. Tracking of information becomes more important. Information in capital markets is a second cost after salaries, so it's something which has to be tracked fairly obviously. And there is a need of strategy behind that. Most banks have it as a side business. It's a small business, their activity when they are into retail banking. And in fact, they just leave that a little bit alone. But it is becoming more and more necessary to have comprehensive inventory tools to be able to control who really get access to the information. There is really a change, and the workload behind that becomes very, very important. In fact, in terms of data usage, it becomes necessary to know who really uses the information in order not to overpay. It becomes important to be able to do proper reporting to any of your providers, because you don't want to get into a situation where you get into an audit where you are under reporting. At the end of the day, what happens is that many banks are either in the situation of under or over reporting. What does that mean? When you under-report, you are at risk of having a huge fine in case of an audit by any financial market or data vendors that you're using. If you're over-reporting, you are just overspending, and that's something probably you don't like to do. Finally, you need to have proper entitlement systems to be able to make sure you give access to the right people at the right time and to control that over time. That is why you need a set of tools to really transform the way you manage financial market data. But that is not the only aspect, and perhaps there is even more to be said in all the information related to unlisted or private company, financial company information. I mean, we are all aware, and it's obvious that Basel III is changing the way banking has to be done, even more so in relation with mid-sized corporate clients or small-sized corporate clients. Well, these issues is creating a huge dynamism in the market, a trend toward, this dynamism can be explained by a trend toward changing practices from proprietary lending toward marketed assets. And this can be seen in the past years with an important growth of the Schuldschein market in Germany, for example. Also by the trend which has created new markets in different countries. You have, for example, in Italy, the Extramod Pro, which was created by Borsa Italia for the mini bonds. You have also new multilateral trading facility, like in Spain, the MARF. All those markets tend to find solutions to help financial intermediaries, namely banks, use their capacity as credit analysts to be able to remarket the financial risk to financial investors and to keep the control over the relation toward the borrower. And you have also, as another example, the rule that was set 4 years ago by the French creating the Euro private placement market. As a whole, private debt, and could be also inferred for private equity, but private equity lies behind that respect, is getting more and more in need of more professional solutions. In fact, we are seeing that all those sectors have evolved in terms of financial know-how and financial practices, but the technology behind lags far behind what we have seen today. There are plenty of things that need still to be done. The workloads, as this is a very active, these are very active markets, are becoming very important, and there is a need for proper tools. At the same time, there are needs, of course, of security, data security, confidentiality of information. We're speaking of the corporate information of private companies. They tend to be quite cautious about those type of information, of course. And the need to have proper ways to have communication between the different partners, namely the borrower, the arrangers, the investors, but also the third parties involved, be it the people in charge of controlling the debt after the issuance, the people making the credit analysis and valuation before the issuance, etc. Another field in which things are becoming quite interesting is data governance. Data governance is something that most of you will have heard about, one of the bad words that we will talk about later on, which is the GDPR. But it was already the case in market data, for example, because, in fact, you need all the control that I mentioned for the issues of market data are roughly the same. And this control, this willingness to know exactly where the information comes from, who is using it, how it is used, is becoming now very extensive. There is a huge need of control. As a whole, the risk levels related to that becomes very heavy, be it the fines from the GDPR, be it the risk that we mentioned. I mean, a field which was relatively irrelevant a couple of years ago, or 4 or 5 years ago, because there was no risk related, is becoming now a risk where you risk millions in case there is something wrong done. And of course, all that is related to a layer of data security because it has to be embedded in all the system. Well, all this has to be done integrating what you already have in terms of platforms and putting layers on top of it to be able to make sure that the governance will work. And it will be, as said, for entitlements, meaning the control of the accesses, the reporting, and the management, because you will need to have complete workflow and permissioning done on all those tools. Finally, something that is probably the biggest chunk of the budgets of most of you here, the compliance issue. In compliance, we are facing an endless and sometimes hard to understand flow of rules. We have spoken long and wide about PSD. We could speak about GDPR. We could speak about MiFID II, etc., etc., etc. These are creating a lot of new needs, and roughly, it's not only a question of new needs, but at the same time, it's creating a lot of pressure. And it's also creating another kind of openness, not the openness on data, but on the fact that you will find much more people overlooking what you're doing in all the type of information that you are controlling. Therefore, you'll get more audits. Therefore, you will be able to be very reactive in responding to that and have a proper track of the financial information all through your organization. And therefore, you need to have tools that are very specific in terms of control and inventory. Mainly, this requires a thorough centralization of the information. You can no longer have systems that are not known centrally. You need to have a good quality of information everywhere. Hence, you need to know what is in all your system. You need to also have a certain homogeneity of your information, because if your information is discrepant from one place to another, that will create other sets of problems. And finally, you need to have access to this information, be able to reuse it, and finally, have a complete inventory of it. All those aspects are issues that we are currently facing in the different markets where we are, mainly in Spain, France, and other European countries. Those are the type of trends that we face into financial data. Well, I don't want to bother you too much, because I know that you are very much into more retail banking than we are. But if you have any question, I would be very, very pleased to try to answer them on the different fields that we are trying to cover.
Thanks very much. Well, that's interesting, David.